How's it going? This is the Core 3 from Fighting Games Online.info. And today we're going to talk about port forwarding. Okay. I'm going to basically show you how to basically do a port forwarding through your router. I'm going to basically give you an example and basically tell you about IP address so that you have a clear understanding of what you need to do in order to port forward um, so that you can play your fighting games with no issue. So I guess the first thing that I guess I want to get into is explaining why you need to open your ports. If you are familiar with playing online, you might be running into some issues where you cannot connect with certain players. Um, Another issue that you might run into is maybe dropping connections being dropped, and that's basically due to you not having your port forwarding set up. Um, Basically, you know, when you're playing a fighting game, it is on a server, um, which is sort of like a host, and of course, it brings all the players together um, through this port, and probably also an IP address, but more mainly, it brings you through this port. Um, and of course, if it's not open, it's going to give you issues. So I guess the first thing that I kind of want to explain before we actually get up into setting up ports um, is why it is that your ports are closed in the first place. Okay, um, and the reason that this mainly is due to what you call the firewall, and the firewall is basically set up to block as many as and many potential threats as possible. So it kind of wants to make sure that you just don't have all these ports open. It wants to make sure that you have ports open that they know for sure you're going to use. Okay, um, and the one that they know for sure that you'll use is for the internet service, of course, for your basic web service. If you're trying to go to Yahoo or you're trying to go to Google, it knows those ports for the most part, and by default, it's already set up so that you don't have any issue connecting to those websites. Okay, and usually the number for that port is 80 um, or 8080, and so that's usually the ports that's used for you to get onto your internet. Okay, now with firewalls, you can also find firewalls as actual software on on your operating systems. Okay, so Windows 7, Windows XP, those carry firewall programs, and they can usually be found in the control panel. And it's pretty important, especially when you're playing an actual game on your computer, to check that to make sure that it's not blocking your ports for that game through the actual software on your computer. Okay, so that's just something that I wanted to also add in. Okay, but for this specific thing, we're just trying to focus mainly on the router situation. Okay, now if you have a modem, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna need to worry about a modem because they're not really built with any firewall. I really don't know the security ramifications, of just connecting through just the modem itself. There's nothing I can really tell you. I've been using routers for a long time, so that issue, was no longer apparent after I started to use a router. Um, but so let's go ahead and I have this little quick makeshift example here so that you get an idea of how IP addresses work. Okay, so so basically, it starts off your ISP is basically going to give you your IP address. Okay, and what your IP address is essentially an address that tells you exactly um, where you are. Basically, it's your country, it's your state, it's your city. It's very accurate information. Okay, if somebody has your IP address, they basically know, for the most part, where you are located. They might not know exactly where you live, but they do know where you're located. Okay, so that's just something that's important to note about what your ISP assigns you as far as your IP address. Okay, now basically from there, um, it will go into your router. Okay, and what will happen is this IP address will basically convert itself, and the router will take it and convert it into what you call a private IP address. Okay, and then this private IP address gets assigned to each of the devices that you have connected to this router, whether it's wired or it's wireless. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's going to assign an IP address for every device that you have. Okay, even the router itself has an IP address, and that's kind of why I added this as an example. Now, just to make another note, this was supposed to be more than 4 numbers, but don't pay attention to that. I'm just kind of using all these are makeup numbers, and we're gonna be using more IP addresses. So I just kind of want to give you an idea of what you see. IP addresses are usually 4 numbers. There are different classes for IP addresses. The older ones usually start off with 192.168, and that's what we're going to be using for our example when I actually show you how to apply port forwarding. Okay, I just wanted to give you a physical idea of how this works. Okay, so I think I mean that's pretty much explained it all. Um, as you can see, like I said, just to kind of review, you see that it basically starts here, and it actually starts. Well, we'll say it starts here at your device, at your your private IP, which goes into your router, and then from here it converts out into your actual real your IP address, which goes out into what you call the cloud, or also known as what's known as your wide area network. Okay, and that's what your internet service provider kind of gives you, the service into the cloud. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the actual example. Oh, and before I forget, I'm about to forget. Um, there's another thing that basically this IP address does. Okay, for your router, you're given this default IP address, and this is going to give you access to all your settings for that router. Okay, even once you get this IP address and you're getting your default IP address, you can actually change the IP address depending on how much security you want to do for yourself, because it's recommended that you don't have your default your default IP address, and the reason why is because it's a manufacturer one, and most people know this. Anybody who's smart know this, and a hacker knows that you know you have this default IP address and you probably haven't changed it. So it's just something to think about, that I want you to think about. But essentially, you're going to put this into your internet browser. You can put it into any internet browser, and the settings are going to come up, and you're going to be able to change your wireless, and you're going to be able to learn about what IP addresses are connected to this router. It's a whole bunch of information. Okay, your port forwarding options are going to be there also. Okay, so here we are, basically within the router settings. Um, as you can see, I've already typed in the default address for the router, and now it's bringing up our options. Okay, um, I guess the first important thing to note um, is that when you're looking for the port forwarding option, it's not always going to be in the same, basically the meaning. The meaning is not going to always be the same for each router. Okay, that meaning can change. For instance, here you see that it's changed to virtual servers. Now, what's important to note is that it's basically falls within I guess, the firewall category. So, underneath firewall, you see that there's virtual servers. So it's kind of like, those are the kind of things that you kind of might want to look for if you're just trying to figure this stuff out on your own. Now, of course, to make this thing just totally easier for yourself, You can go to portforwarding.com. You can go on Google and look up your router, and you can find exactly what option uses port forwarding. Okay, and that's kind of just the easier way to do that. All right. Now let's go ahead and start entering this stuff in. I'm going to clear everything out. We're just going to do it all over again. Of course, the first thing you want to do is you want to enable, turn on enable. This basically allows you to kind of just turn off and turn on ports as you need them. It's very important to note that you're not really going to be able to use the same port for multiple devices. 9 times out of 10, you're only going to be able to use one port open one port per device. Okay, so that's really enable. So I think having this here where you can kind of enable and disable ports can be very helpful if you don't want to have to keep typing and retyping in for each port. When you're ready to play a game. Okay. So for this example, we're going to go ahead and typing in as we were going to just use Xbox. And things to note is you definitely want to add descriptions for your ports because you're going to be putting in a lot of ports. Xbox Live has a few ports. We're just going to use this, just one for this example. But you just don't want to get yourself confused, so you want to make sure that you're giving your ports a description, so that while you're adding them, it's not getting jumbled up, and you know exactly which ports are for what. So that's just something for your own importance. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add the ports in. All right. Okay. Now, I just kind of want to stop here for a second because it's very important to note. Notice that I have put in the port of 3047 and then I put it in again. All right. And the reason I did that is because we were basically, when I got my information, I was only given one port, to open. 3047, another port is 53. They're only giving me one port that I need to open. In this case, the way it's set up, and the way that most port forwarding programs are set up, they're set up in a way that you're going to be opening basically, like port 3047 to port 3048. It's set up for you to open several ports at once, rather than just opening up one port. So if you only need to open up one port, then you basically just keep putting the same port in, and that's basically filling in everything properly. As long as you're putting it in the same port, it doesn't matter. You don't want to put in 0. That's the wrong thing to do. You got to put in, just the port itself that you've been assigned. And if it's only that one port, then that's just it. You put in 3047, put your 3047 in the end. Anything extra they tell you, like a target port or whatever, you're still gonna put in 3047. Just doesn't matter. Okay. Moving on, then you come up to the type. Now, of course, once again, Xbox Live, anywhere you get your information on what ports you need to open up, they're usually going to tell you whether you need to open up a TCP, whether it needs to be a UDP. All that information will be given to you. Sometimes it's both. So, they have all 3 options here for you. We're just going to stick to TCP for this example. Okay. The next thing, of course, is getting your private IP address. Okay. Now, of course, there are 2 ways to do this. If you don't have too many devices on your router, you can kind of just head up to here. This is your DHCP client list, and that's going to tell you, what devices, what IP addresses. Sometimes they're very clear, sometimes they're not. I think most times for the Xbox, I don't believe they'll tell you exactly that, this is the Xbox. But in this case, they do have my computer's name. For the sake of just, my own security, there's a little too much detail for me. So I'm not really going to reveal that here. But that essentially is how I will get my IP address. There are other ways to get your IP address, and I'm going to show you. Let's say you want to get the IP address of your computer, um, and that's basically what I'm just, I'm using my computer as the example. But you can go through here. This is Windows 7, so I'm going to show you how you would access it through Windows 7. This is sort of like a little shortcut that you could do. Okay, go into adapter settings. And here you can see that I have 3 network devices. I have my Bluetooth, my wired connection, and I have my wireless, which I've disabled. Sticking with my wired connection, to me that's the best thing to use when you're going online and playing fighting games and video games in general. You kind of want to keep your wired device. Okay, so then what I do is I'm going to right click again, and then I'm going to go to status. And it's not going to give me my IP address, sadly. There's some things going on with this router, but essentially this is where you would go if you needed to get your IP address. If you had the Xbox, you kind of would use their settings, and you would kind of go into there and find out what IP address you might have for your Xbox. They do, in fact, give you that info. It's not very hard to look up. And I might actually go ahead and do that, in another example. Okay. But essentially, that's what you're doing. You're just making sure you know what your IP address is. Once you know your IP address, you're going to come back here. And then you're going to go ahead and type yours in. I know mine's already. It is 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and finish this out. Once again, there is no other port that I need to have open except 3047. So I'm going to continue putting in the 3047 port to make sure everything is filled out. And then once it's all done, I'm going to go ahead and apply the changes. And everything is basically saved. As you can see, it's saved, it's all enabled, and we're good to go. Okay. So that's pretty much, basically all there is to it. Um, uh, Another recommendation that I can make is you can go to portforwarding.com. I have that link on my website. And what you can do is they have a program available that allows you to check to make sure that you have actually opened your ports properly. Okay, because you can definitely run into that issue where the port is not opened on the router, and that's a pretty good program that'll tell you if your port is opened or not. Okay, so it kind of helps you take away the guessing game. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much it. You know, uh, yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully that was helpful and kind of understood everything for the concept. Just remember that, like I said, the settings are not going to be the same. But of course, you can go ahead, go to Google, and go to portforwarding.com, and definitely they should have that information for you. Even YouTube, sometimes will go over port forwarding for your exact device. Okay, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how it worked. If you want to add a port. Okay. So hopefully that helped. Good luck. And enjoy yourself online.